Welcome back to the deep dive. We are tackling something massive today, and I really don't use that word lightly. We have a stack of research on the desk here. It's titled Minds and Movements, and it covers two figures who, well, they usually take up about half the history section in any bookstore.
It really doesn't get any bigger than this pairing. We're looking at the two, the ultimate archetypes of conquest, the absolute heavyweights.
We are talking about Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan,
Yeah.
but, and I want to stop you right there, if you're tuning in hoping for a breakdown of phalanx spear formations or maybe a tutorial on composite bows,
Yeah.
you're going to be disappointed. We are not doing the war room analysis today.
Which is honestly our relief. Because usually when you see these two names together, it just turns into this weird historical fantasy football match.
Right. Who had the better KD ratio?
Who conquered more square miles? It just becomes a scoreboard exercise.
Exactly. Flattens them, turns them into video game characters.
Yeah.
But this research, it's asking a much more complicated question. It's looking at their ghosts.
Right. The ghosts.
The specific, lingering marks they left on the human species long after the dust settled. The central thesis in Minds and Movements is fascinating because it argues that while both were conquerors, their net effects were almost perfect opposites.
Yes.
We're trying to figure out how one of them reshaped the human mind while the other reshaped human connectivity.
And that's a compelling framework. It forces us to look at the trade-off between, say, culture and force.
Yeah.
Between ideas and systems. Because when you strip away the armor and all the legends, you realize they were building two completely different types of worlds.
How so?
One was an architect of software, the other was an engineer of hardware.
I love that distinction, software and hardware. So let's get into it. We've got the architect of ideas versus the engine of connectivity. Chronologically, I guess we had to start with the architect. Alexander.
Alexander of Macedon, 4th century BC.
Now, the source makes a bold claim right away. It says Alexander's primary legacy wasn't the empire itself, which, let's be honest, it fell apart the second he died.
Instantly.
But the creation of a Hellenistic world. I feel like Hellenistic is one of those words people just nod at in museums, but don't actually define. How is the source defining it here?
That's a great point because it is easy to gloss over. In this context, Hellenistic doesn't just mean, Greek-ish.
Or people in togas.
Exactly. It refers to a specific, very intentional of culture. The source argues that Alexander didn't just want to rule over Persians or Egyptians. He wanted to install a new operating system for civilization.
An operating system. So he wasn't just collecting taxes, he was changing the interface.
He was exporting a way of being. And the core code of that operating system was the Greek language.
The source calls this the software of civilization. That sounds pretty grand, but practically, what did that actually look like on the ground?
Practically, it meant standardization. Before Alexander, if you were a scholar in Athens, you couldn't really talk to a scholar in Babylon or Memphis. There was no shared protocol. Alexander's conquests forced Greek, specifically Koine Greek, to become the universal standard.
So it basically functioned like English does today in, say, international business or aviation.
Very similar. It became the language of science, of philosophy, of trade. If you wanted to be a player in the world for the next few centuries, you learned Greek. And this allowed for a huge transmission of knowledge across borders that previously had, zero intellectual trade.
And this leads to the part of the research that really struck me. When we picture an ancient army marching, we picture guys with spears, shields, maybe some siege engines.
Yeah.
But Alexander's army was kind of weirdly academic.
It was essentially a traveling university. That's a key detail the notes highlight. He didn't just bring soldiers, he brought historians, botanists, geographers, philosophers, right along with the cavalry.
Right, you have to remember, he was tutored by Aristotle.
He literally had the world's greatest philosopher in his ear growing up. It changes things.
So when he marched, he wasn't just burning villages, he was collecting data.
Collecting data and planting seeds. He was spreading logic, geometry, medical theories everywhere he went. He was funding research expeditions while on a war campaign. It's wild.
So when the source says he reshaped the human mind, it's implying that he planted the seeds of Western rationalism all the way in the East.
Precisely. And that knowledge didn't disappear when soldiers went home or when the empire fractured. It fused with local knowledge. This Hellenistic tradition, it eventually becomes the foundation for Roman civilization. Then it gets preserved and even expanded by Islamic civilization, which is a huge part of the story.
Crucial part.
And eventually it circles all the way back to kickstart the European Renaissance.
That's wild to think about, that when we learn geometry or logic today, or even the scientific method, we are, in a weird way, interacting with the ghosts of Alexander's ambition.
We are running the software he installed 2,300 years ago.
But there's a political layer to this software too, isn't there? The source talks about the concept of the cosmopolitan empire. Now, when I hear cosmopolitan, I think of a city with good cocktails.
Well, the root is the same. Cosmos meaning world, polities meaning citizen.
Citizen of the world.
Exactly. This is the shift from us versus them to all of us.
Which sounds very modern, almost suspiciously modern for a guy in 300 BC. Is the source arguing he was some kind of ancient humanitarian?
No, and we have to be careful there. He was still a king who demanded total obedience and, killed anyone who hesitated. But the innovation was the idea that you could be Persian or Egyptian or Indian and still be part of the civilized world, providing you adopted the culture.
So it's the melting pot idea, but a mandatory one.
A forced melting pot, yes. Before this, empires were strictly tribal. Alexander popularized the idea that a ruler's job wasn't just to conquer, but to civilize. He founded cities, dozens of them named Alexandria, specifically to be hubs of this new culture. Gymnasiums, theaters, the works.
Okay, so to summarize the architect side of our equation before we move on, Alexander's impact was integration through culture. He changed how people thought, how they argued, how they saw themselves.
Correct. He targeted the mind.
Okay, so that's the mind. Now we need to pivot to the movement. We're jumping forward about 1,500 years to the steppes of Mongolia. Genghis Khan.
A completely different animal.
The contrast in the source material is stark. If Alexander was the architect of ideas, Genghis is labeled the network engineer.
I love that description. If Alexander is the software, Genghis is the hardware. He didn't care about your philosophy, he cared about the plumbing.
The plumbing of the world. And his big achievement, according to these documents, is global connectivity. But wait a minute, people were trading before Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
The world wasn't static. What did he actually change?
That's the crucial question. Yes, people were trading, but specifically on the Silk Road. Before the Mongols, it was a nightmare. It wasn't a road, it was a gauntlet.
A gauntlet.
It was a series of disconnected trails run by local warlords. You get robbed, walk 10 miles, pay a tariff, get robbed again, maybe get killed by a bandit. It was high risk, low volume.
This was inefficient.
Incredibly inefficient. What Genghis Khan did was unite almost the entire Eurasian landmass under one single political system. And because one power controlled everything from the Pacific to the borders of Europe, they could do something that had never been done.
Which was?
They could turn the Silk Road into a superhighway.
He changed the risk calculation.
He eliminated the risk. The Mongols imposed the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. The source quotes that famous saying, "A maiden could walk from the rising sun to the setting sun with a gold plate on her head and not be molested."
That's a powerful image. Gold plate on your head.
It's propaganda, sure, but it speaks to a reality. They policed the roads, they standardized laws, and because it was safe, trade just, it exploded. This wasn't just connectivity in the abstract. This was the birth of true globalization.
And the source notes this happened centuries before Europe discovered the rest of the world.
Exactly. The Mongols had already hardwired the connection, and what flowed through those wires wasn't just silk.
No. This is where the network engineer title really fits. The source lists 4 technologies that basically built the modern world. Gunpowder, paper, the compass, and printing.
The big 4.
All of them originated in the East, mostly China, but they moved west to Europe, largely because the Mongol Empire created the conduit for them.
It's just so ironic to think about, isn't it? We usually associate the printing press with Gutenberg and European innovation, but the source is arguing that the technology transfer was facilitated by a Mongol warlord.
It's the law of unintended consequences. Genghis wasn't trying to enlighten Europe, he was trying to conquer the world. But by building a secure network for his own power, he allowed these world-altering technologies to just flow like water.
And it wasn't just physical goods. The source mentions the yam.
The yam, the name is a bit funny. What was it?
The yam is incredible. It was the internet of the 13th century.
Okay, How did it work? Was it just a mail service?
It was a high-speed, military-grade relay system. They had stations every 20 or 30 miles. A rider would gallop full speed, arrive at a station, and either swap horses instantly or pass the packet to a fresh rider. They could move information across the largest empire in history in days.
Wow.
Days. Before that, it took months.
That is a massive logistical advantage.
It's the difference between dial-up and fiber optics. It allowed for diplomatic immunity, coordinated troop movements, centralized control. It was pure systems engineering.
However, and we have to address this because the source material has a pretty dark section titled Destruction and Trauma. We can't talk about Genghis Khan like he was, I don't know, Jeff Bezos building Amazon.
No, we can't gloss over that.
This connectivity came at a horrific price.
Alexander was violent, for sure, but Genghis Khan's expansion was on a different scale of horror. We're talking about the erasure of entire cities.
The numbers are staggering. The source mentions just massive population loss across China, the Islamic world.
And it wasn't collateral damage, it was policy. The psychological impact section notes that they weaponized fear. If a city resisted, they wouldn't just defeat the army, they would wipe out the population.
To send a message to the next city.
The message was, surrender, or you cease to exist.
So he built the highway, but he paved it with bones.
That is a gruesome but accurate way to put it. And here is where the history gets really complex and uncomfortable. The source argues that this destruction cleared the board.
The forest fire theory.
Exactly. By wiping out the old feudal aristocracies in Russia, China, and the Middle East, he destroyed the old social orders. He valued meritocracy. He didn't care who your dad was. He cared if you were loyal and competent.
So by burning down the old structures, he created space for new powers and new orders to rise up.
Yes. It was integration through force, followed by a radical restructuring of society.
And there's one more integration fact the source drops. A biological one.
I think I know what you're referring to.
The genetic legacy.
Right. It's impossible to ignore. Genghis Khan left one of the largest genetic lineages in human history. It's a stark biological reminder that this wasn't just a political conquest, it was a total absorption.
So if we look at the scorecard for Genghis, integration through force, followed by this massive economic and technological exchange.
Force first, then trade.
Okay, so we've got our two players, Alexander, the architect of ideas, Genghis, the engine of connectivity. Now I want to bring them into the ring together. The source has this core difference table that puts them head to head.
And this is where the analysis really shines, seeing them side by side.
Let's run through these contrasts. First up, ideas spread versus trade spread.
This goes right back to our software versus hardware analogy. Alexander moves logic, math, drama. Genghis moves gunpowder, compasses, diplomatic pouches.
Next one, culture first versus power first.
This is a crucial distinction in leadership style. Alexander wanted you to act Greek. He wanted you to embrace the culture. Genghis, he was surprisingly pragmatic. The source highlights his religious tolerance.
Which feels so counterintuitive for a guy we just described as wiping out entire cities.
It does, but it makes sense structurally. He didn't care what god you prayed to. As long as you paid your tribute and didn't rebel, you could worship a rock for all he cared. He was interested in power and logistics, not your soul.
Alexander wanted your soul.
Alexander wanted your soul.
That's a fascinating inversion. We usually think of the barbarian as the intolerant one, and the civilized Greek as the open-minded one. But structurally, Genghis was more tolerant just because he was indifferent.
Exactly. Indifference looks a lot like tolerance when you're a subject.
Okay, next point. Short-lived empire versus a long-lasting system.
Alexander's political empire died with him. Poof, gone. But the culture, that Hellenistic world that lasted for centuries, it outlived the politics.
Whereas with Genghis,
the Mongol Empire held together politically for quite a while, but it eventually fractured. However, the system he created, the world system of trade and connection, that changed the geopolitical map permanently. He hooked the East to the West. You couldn't unplug it after that.
Which leads to the final comparison. Intellectual legacy versus structural legacy.
And that brings us right back to the beginning. The mind versus movement concept. Alexander worked on the internal world of humanity, how we process information. Genghis worked on the external world, how we move things through our environment.
Makes me wonder, which is more necessary? I mean, if you could only keep one legacy, Greek logic or Mongol connectivity?
That is the million-dollar question. And the source argues that for the modern world to exist, you actually need both. You need the scientific method, that's Alexander. But the scientific method is useless if you can't ship the printing press or the textbook to the next country, and that's Genghis.
So we're the product of a collision between these two ghosts.
We are living in the interception of their legacies, absolutely.
The source material boils all this down to a final verdict. It's pretty punchy.
It is.
The verdict is Alexander changed how humans think, and Genghis Khan changed how humans connect.
And when you sit with that, it really challenges your definition of influence, doesn't it? Usually we think influence is just who is in charge. But here you see that influence can be internal rewiring your brain or external rewiring the planet.
It's the difference between convincing someone to read a book and building the Amazon delivery truck that brings the book to their house.
That is the perfect analogy. Alexander wrote the book, Genghis built the logistics network. And the sobering part of all this is that both of these things were born out of extreme violence.
That is the heavy part.
Oh.
We can't escape that.
We can't. The source emphasizes that integration through culture and integration through force. They both started with armies. The catalyst for civilization in both cases was war.
So what does this mean for you listening today? Why should we care about these two ancient warlords?
I think it matters because we're always trying to understand the structure of our own reality. We live in a world that is hyper-connected, that's the Genghis legacy, but we also rely on a specific intellectual tradition to make sense of that world, and that's the Alexander legacy.
It also makes you look at modern leaders differently. I mean, who are the Alexanders and who are the Genghis Khans of the 21st century?
That's the question. Are we in an era driven by ideas, by ideologies and cultural shifts? Or are we in an era driven by systems, by supply chains, algorithms, and infrastructure?
Think about the tech giants. Is a company like Google and Alexander organizing the world's information and logic? Or is it a Genghis just building the pipes and connections?
Or maybe the scary part is that they're trying to be both.
That brings us to our final thought. The source leaves us with this big picture synthesis. Both achieved integration, but the methods were fundamentally different. Violence leading to ideas versus violence leading to trade.
And it challenges us to ask, which legacy is actually more durable?
So here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We've seen the distinction, mind versus movement.
In the modern world right now, do we value the legacy of the mind more, or the legacy of movement?
We are obsessed with speed, with same-day delivery, with global streaming. That is pure movement. That's the Genghis legacy. But we're also obsessed with content, with the message, with education. That's the Alexander legacy.
Has culture won out, or has logistics won out?
Is the pen mightier than the sword? Or is the trade route mightier than the philosophy?
It's a debate that's been running for 2,000 years, and honestly, looking at the news, I don't think it's over yet.
Definitely not. We're still living in the echo. On that note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you look at your map and your bookshelf a little differently today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.